Good morning. My name is Erin O'Mara, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nation Fund for Independent Journalism. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 7th Annual Puffin Nation Student Journalism Conference. Welcome. Welcome to our highly accomplished group of student editors, writers, and reporters, tuning in from across the United States and around the world, including Pakistan, Nepal, Germany, Canada, and Great Britain. We are grateful for your work and that you're taking time to be with us today. I want to thank the Puffin Foundation for making this conference possible and for believing in our mission. The Nation Fund for Independent Journalism was created with the belief that independent journalism has the capacity to bring about a more equitable world. And the key to that vision is to train the next generations of journalists and leaders. The Student Journalism Conference is one of our programs, and I invite you to go to thenationfund.org to learn more. I have a few points to help you get the most out of your day. Please ask questions. Every session, there'll be time devoted for your questions, so don't be shy. You can put your questions in the chat for the moderators and speakers to address as they come up. We'll also have lots of networking breaks and a breakout session where you'll be able to talk directly to speakers and each other. And a note about the breakout. The breakout session is at 3:30. This is a workshop for you to share ideas and projects and get feedback. If you're not comfortable talking, that's okay, just listen. A Nation writer or editor will join each group. Everyone has been randomly assigned to a breakout room. So once you join your session, please click the Share My Audio Video button in order to be placed on the screen with the rest of your group. And last but not least, a big thanks to Sarah Burke, Peter Rothberg, and all the Nation writers and editors who have come together to make this an extraordinary day. And with that, I'd like to introduce Katrina Heuvel, a former Nation intern and the editorial director and publisher of The Nation.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you and Sarah and Peter and all the editors who've come together today. I want to thank the students who are independent media makers in their own right and are running newsrooms, some of the newsrooms bigger than the Nation's, coming from, as Erin said, around the world, around the country. I want to thank Neil and Gladys of Rosenstein of the Puffin Foundation, which has been so generous in supporting these conferences and understanding the power and promise of student journalism, of students. And you do have a great group today to guide you. And as Erin said, there are no questions that shouldn't be asked. I'm a believer in more questions than answers. So I'm envious. I may stay around and learn this afternoon, but I just wanted to say a few words about the Nation, which was, and speak about its relevance, extraordinary relevance at this moment of war and peace. But the Nation was founded by abolitionists committed to ending slavery. In New York, Nation was founded in 1865 in New York City. One of its founders was the architect of Central Park, of Prospect Park, of other public spaces in this country, Frederick Law Olmsted. But the tradition and the importance of the commitment to principled work has been at the heart of the Nation for more than 150 years. For those who follow publications come and gone online or print, it probably started with the least buzzy, if you know that term, a line in magazine history, quote, "The week was singularly barren of exciting events." I have never experienced such a week. I know Erin hasn't. I know all of those who gather today, journalists and editors, have not. But perhaps coming off the Civil War, it was a sense of the possibility of moving forward after war. The Nation has long covered, oxygenated, sustained movements of our time. We are a believer that social movements have brought about the fundamental changes in our society. We believe firmly in small d democratic politics, but we are also, as I said, believers in the movements. The Nation, at the Nation, the NAACP was founded with the sustenance of many. The ACLU, which was American Civil Liberties Union, which started as an anti-war group, was partially founded out of the Nation. But in these last years, when you think about how our politics has shifted, and it's a difficult time. I want to quote Toni Morrison, one of our longtime editorial board members, in a minute, about the promise and the peril of these times. But there's no question that the racial justice movements, the reproductive justice movements, the economic rights movements have shifted our politics to a point where what was once considered marginal is now mainstream. And we have to fight for it. But the work the Nation does is a reporting of honesty, of we believe we have a right, as someone said, to our own opinion, but not to our own facts. And that's a discussion in a time of alternative facts. Toni Morrison once wrote, and she was a long-time editorial board member of extraordinary, just when she would come to a meeting, there was a luminosity and a power. But she wrote, "This is precisely the time when artists and writers go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write. That is how civilizations heal." She continued, "I know the world is bruised and bleeding. And though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art." And I think that is something that animates our work, even from day to day. Part of I think the reason the Nation has survived in this nanosecond shifting universe is not only because we've brought a lawsuit against Google in support of independent media, David versus Goliath, I know, or what we might call it today, but in a belief that we're not just suing on the behalf of the Nation or the two other plaintiffs, but a belief that these behemoths are predatory in their approach to, quote, content. And if there are going to be many voices, we need to take on the structural damage that is being done now. This may seem utopian, but I do think there is more commitment. There's not much oxygen in the air right now, but there's more commitment to antitrust in the sense of power, media, and independent voices. I think we've survived partly because we bring history to bear. And we don't do it we do it in I hope, a light way, but you need to, seems to me, know the history to know. I think of, for example, our civil rights correspondent, Martin Luther King Jr., who did a civil rights audit every year for the Nation from 1961 to 1967. I was just rereading. He spoke at a Nation event in 1967, a year before he gave his famous Riverside Church speech. I want to say sometimes when I think, what is distinctive about the Nation? I think about the reaction to King's speech at Riverside Church, April 4th, 1967. When he delivered that speech at a time of great turmoil like today, a time of a brutal war in Vietnam, many warned him not to give that speech, but he felt he had no choice but to speak out. And when he did speak out about themes that I think are part of our world today, the racism, militarism, extreme materialism, he was denounced by his allies, by the civil rights community. The New York Times and the Washington Post were scathing in saying he had destroyed the civil rights movement. The Nation wrote, "King's Riverside Church speech will rank as one of the most significant of his career, laced with eloquence and morally uncompromising." I find that important in the context of, if there's a through line in the Nation, it's the belief that military misadventures do not permit true democracy at home. But King was denounced, and I think it's a measure sometimes of how unpopular views, even heretical views, can move to be more accepted if you have a publication which is willing to argue. Today, you're going to hear from, and this is consistent with, Elie Mystal is our justice correspondent, and he speaks to the justice and peace and to the through line of rights, justice, the principled words that King spoke of. And he has become a force. His theme today, I was surprised to see, is how you make your place in the media environment. Well, Ellie writes in a way that he's on TV all the time, but he's on TV because of what he writes, not only in The Nation, but in other places. But he is someone who speaks in the tradition of justice and peace. And you're also going to meet people who've worked for years to develop beats, which I think is an important issue, because voting rights, for example, has become a beat. Criminal justice is something that the nation has long covered in different ways. Our stop and frisk, if you recall, the abusive use of stop and frisk in New York City remains a big issue, but our video, because we're not only a magazine, we're multimedia, we are thenation.com, podcasts, but our multimedia video on stop and frisk of about a decade ago was cited by the judge in the case, making stop and frisk an illegal tactic. And I think that's very important when the work is used to advance justice. And we don't just do the work for ourselves, we do it to make change. And I think that at the heart of the nation and independent media, to make change, to call for a reckoning, to hold the powerful accountable, and to build a more fair and just society is at the root of what we try to do every day. Now, don't think we come in every morning, and we're not coming in. We hope to come in sometime. I mean, it's been a tough few years for all of us, but we are able to do the work. But, don't think we come in every morning with a lot of principles. We do the work, but we are informed by those high principles. I want to close. We have had over the years almost every major writer of literature, politics, culture write for us. And I want to just come back to the issue of war and peace. Jeremy Scahill, I saw him the other night on a program, I forget, but he wrote for us about Blackwater, if you remember. He wrote about mercenaries, private contractors in times of war. One of the things I think the Nation does is it publishes articles thinking that once you've read, you cannot pick up or look at a story on the internet in the same way about that issue. So when you look at Iraq, for example, which was a subject of real coverage, I know it feels a long time ago, but there's a thread again about military misadventures, but Jeremy's work was extraordinary. And you cannot read about Afghanistan today and the humanitarian crisis without thinking about his work and how it frames it. So I just want to end by saying, I hope you feel a connection to the Nation after this conference, because you're going to meet some of our superb writers, thinkers. Some of them have left. Ken Klippenstein is a master filer of Freedom of Information Acts, and I don't think you'll diminish that idea, issue, or purpose after you hear him. Richard Kim, longtime editor at The Nation, is now at a publication called The City, covering New York City, which is another part of our work because we've been based here for over 150 years. But I hope you feel a connection to the Nation, and I hope you go out and, remind or talk to your friends in all ways about coming and checking it out. So on this day, I've been spending a lot of this past week, but probably 40 years of my life thinking about Russia. So it's been the Ukraine crisis is cruel, as are many of the crises of militarism and war. But I want to say that I conclude with a line which I've thought of before, which is that there are no lost causes. There are causes waiting to be fought for, causes waiting to be won, causes waiting to be written about. And that's our work in the end, to write to think, to advance, and to make to find some of the great writers and editors. I'm very proud, and I know this sounds odd coming at the end of this talk, but Dave Zirin, who you're going to meet, he's the first sports correspondent for The Nation. And you'll hear Dave, sports is redefined when he talks.
We have some questions from our attendees, and so maybe we could spend a few minutes.
Absolutely.
Terrific.
I hope there's some to you, Erin.
We'll see. We'll see what comes up. Katrina, you've often talked about continuity and change in the context of The Nation, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what has stayed the same at The Nation, and then what has been some of the changes over your time in running the magazine.
Well, as we sometimes say, Erin, we've been there from the teletype machine to Twitter. So, I mean, there's that change, obviously, in this kind of how we do the work. When I was an intern, I literally ran the teletype. There was a correspondent in the Middle East I was there when the fax came in. So those issues are different. I mean, we're now online in big ways. And but in terms of continuity of, we were founded with a commitment to abolishing slavery, this commitment to civil rights, the commitment to racial justice is one that we lift up with many writers. I think of Ellie, I think of Eric Foner, a historian of Reconstruction. I think of Reverend Barber, who has become, as some of, I hope is someone who we identified early too, which is one of the things I think The Nation has done continuously. Ari Berman, our voting rights correspondent, when no one knew Reverend Barber, he went down to North Carolina and introduced Reverend Barber to the country in a sense. And he is very much, he's the civil rights correspondent in the way Martin Luther King Jr. was. The commitment to, I think, feminism, women's rights came more slowly at The Nation. And I think that's critical. And also a respect for transgender. I'm just saying, in 1950s, you didn't see what you see now, which is a commitment to all the rights that a civilized country advances. And finding new correspondents, new arenas. But there's continuity and change in the sense of commitment to what I was saying, opposition to militarism, opposition to racism. And there is a great commitment now to climate. Our Covering Climate Now project. In the 50s, 60s, climate was not on the agenda in the way it is now. And we have made it, as other, organizations, the Times, have understood it to be an existential crisis.
We have a question from Maddie Jans. How does The Nation stay on the cutting edge and keep up with the rapidly changing media ecosystem while retaining its value of anti-sensationalism?
I think that speaks to the continuity and change, that there are fundamental principles that animate us. And the seriousness of purpose. On the other hand, we're not opposed to sensationalism if it advances and exposes injustice, arrogance of power, lack of accountability. I do think in this very difficult media environment, there is a question about how you do the work and get the work out most effectively. So we do think about that, but we do have a principled stand. And I think it's the independent media. So many media companies are cogs in a corporate structure. And I think it's the independent media, which Erin spoke about, which is the commitment of this fund and the commitment of our work today with you, is very important and very difficult, increasingly so. So we savor and value that enormously as part of what you asked about.
You mentioned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and what do you think American media has been missing most in this coverage? And what do Americans not know from the media, from our media, that we should?
Well, we don't have 2 weeks, but no, I don't mean that glibly. I think the humanitarian crisis is critical to cover and to stay with. I think what we see in Afghanistan is a war that cost $5 trillion, and now we can't find $5 billion for the humanitarian crisis. So we have to keep following what's happening in Ukraine. I think people don't know that inside Russia, there is a strong opposition to this war, and there is an independent community that has not been suppressed, repressed in any way fully by Putin. And finally, we have not been served well, it seems to me, by the media with its unrelenting focus on Putin in these last years, because the country has many forces within it. It's multifaceted and multicolored. And I think it was critical to cover that, as well as the militarism of relations between the two countries has not been covered well.
So this is a question from Zuri Pope, and it builds on the last. On the topic of war and peace, do you feel the media coverage of the Ukraine crisis has been adequate? And I think you just mentioned that. And the second part is, what does it mean to be anti-war in your?
Yeah. You know, being anti-war is not just anti-military action. It's being for justice and peace, and it's for finding other institutions. The thing that worries me, the questioner raises, is our relations have been so militarized, our institutions, our budgets, that we need to think anew, it seems to me, about what security means, especially in this time of pandemic, of climate crisis, and of global inequality. And that's what really concerns me moving forward. Obviously, one condemns military action, violation of international law where we see it, with Russia in this case. But how we move forward is, I think, a big question, and will be made more difficult in empowering what I believe are the most military forces in both countries and elsewhere in this time moving forward.
A question from James Riley. Has the mentality with which you approach your work been impacted by the advent of social media and the editorial nature of objective journalism today?
So my predecessor, Victor Navasky, had every intern group do a project on objectivity, which he never believed in. I think objectivity is elusive, has always been elusive. I think what's important is that the nation is honest about its values and open and discloses its values and believes in facts, but also believes in a set of values and principles. But it's, you know, the social media, which, by the way, we think a lot about because we believe in getting our word out, our news out, our coverage out to millions of people. Yes, has to be dealt with a set of principles, and that's more and more difficult as we see. But I don't think it's changed our work, but it's informed. And we do meet, as Lizzie well knows, and talk about metrics and look at different digital sources and, you know, we're not on TikTok, but all of them, Instagram, you know, Twitter, and the numbers are good, but we do it with care. And it's a tricky world out there. I mean, we do not shy away from conflict. We have a very, Lizzie works with him, a Palestine correspondent. That is distinctive for an American publication. And that can bring great conflict on the Twitter on feed, but you handle it with principle, it seems to me. Even though these are new forms, you apply existing principles. But I can't deny it's a tricky world, and we're navigating it. And I think to be independent is of great value, as we do.
From Anthony Robert, In covering events, how can you avoid bias without making a false equivalence between accurate and inaccurate ideas and statements?
Whoa. All right. Calling Kierkegaard. That has so many layers to it. I'd have to think hard. I mean, it's not bias, it's a stance. And if you disclose and you're honest about where you're coming from. There's a lot of talk about disinformation these days. Hey, Richard.
Hi, Katrina.
Dave Zirin, they could do, but I'd have to, that has layers to it. Oh, look, Richard has the city. Oh, that's good. Sorry. Erin, I don't mean to diminish the question. Maybe the next group could handle it, could speak to it.
Right. Well, it's an important question. It builds up.
It is.
You mentioned in your opening that we're all entitled to,
Right.
our opinions, but not our own set of facts.
But biases is a loaded word in my mind sometimes for a set of views, for a stance, for a point of view. And I think our media diminishes, not all of it, but much of it diminishes. For example, partisanship has been defined too often by the food fights we see on cable TV, when in fact, to be a partisan is to hold strong views about a certain issue and to debate them openly. I do think the fact that we don't have much debate about key issues in our media is not a service. We have a debate section, which in the Nation now, which may be ginning up a debate where you could have a more, but I think debate is critical. And there are unfinished, on the left, on the progressive left, there are debates to be had. And I think that's honest, instead of shutting down debate and saying this is the way, which happens, I think, too often in corporate media.
So I think we have just time for one more question. I see the panels come into the stage. So we'll just ask one more question and turn it over. It's from Sajina Shretha, and I'm so sorry if I not pronounce your name properly. On the topic of objectivity, what steps can journalists take to address their implicit biases while also acknowledging that they are subjective writers?
Disclosure, I mean, that's one. Reading widely and bringing to bear a range of views. But I think being honest with the readers, whether it's in pixel or, in print, but I think that plays a major role. But opening your mind to a full range of views, discarding, but at least having that framework. And history, if you have a chance to read more widely. I do think more and more of my colleagues may disagree, but becoming not an expert, but a beat. For example, Richard's now at the City. And I think it's important to have journalists who build a set of sources, who build a set of relationships with people they're covering. And I think that demands more time than our media often gives for people to build that out. And I'm thinking of Dave. I mean, building out your work. The support of independent media is important in that, but I don't know enough, but I do know that to be a foreign correspondent, US media as opposed to European media often moves someone after 2 or 3 years. And so, if you stay longer, you are building a network, but US media doesn't give that opportunity very often. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I'm staying for this conference because I need to learn. And I very thank you, Erin, and thank you for being here, all of you. I think it'll be a great day.
Be a great day. And I think we're on to the next panel.